Picture this. You've been seeing someone for 4 months. The texts are flirty, the dates feel like something out of a movie, and when you're together, everything seems perfect. But every single time you try to bring up what this actually is, every time you work up the courage to ask, what are we? They change the subject. Or they smile and say they're not really into labels right now. Or they pivot to something else so smoothly that somehow you end up feeling like you were the one being weird for even asking. And so you wait. You tell yourself to be patient. You tell yourself that what you have is special, that it doesn't need a name, that maybe this is just how modern relationships work. But underneath all of that, there's this quiet, persistent ache. This feeling that you're standing outside a door that never quite opens. If that scenario hit a little too close to home, I need you to know something important before we go any further. You are not alone, you are not crazy, and what you're feeling is not an overreaction. Millions of people in their 20s and 30s right now are sitting in that exact same confusion, feeling more heartbroken over something that technically wasn't even a relationship than they felt after actual committed breakups. And today, we're going to explore exactly why that is. Because the answer is going to change the way you see everything. Let's start with a definition, because the word situationship gets thrown around a lot but rarely gets the serious treatment it deserves. A situationship isn't just a friends with benefits arrangement. It's not a casual hookup where both people have agreed to keep things light. It's something far more emotionally complicated than either of those things. A situationship lives in the gray zone. It has the emotional texture of a real relationship, the intimacy of a real relationship, sometimes even the routine and dependency of a real relationship, but without any of the clarity, commitment, or security that should come with one. You share inside jokes. You meet each other's friends. You talk about things that matter. Maybe you've even had conversations about your families, your fears, your futures. But when it comes to actually defining what you are to each other, the door stays shut. And in 2026, this has become one of the dominant relationship structures for young Americans, and it's not an accident that it happened this way. Dating apps fundamentally changed the psychology of how people enter romantic connections. When you have Hinge, Tinder, and Bumble on your phone, the perceived abundance of options makes commitment feel riskier. Why lock something down when there's theoretically always someone else just a swipe away? Add to that the post-pandemic emotional guardedness that a lot of people are still carrying, years of isolation that made deep vulnerability feel genuinely dangerous, and you get a dating culture that's simultaneously more connected and more emotionally unavailable than any generation before it. Research consistently shows that single rates among Americans in their 20s and 30s have risen significantly over the last decade. App fatigue is real. People report feeling exhausted by the paradox of infinite choice leading to less satisfaction, not more. And caught in the middle of all of it are real people, with real feelings, trying to build something genuine in a landscape that sometimes seems designed to prevent it. Now let's get into the psychology, because this is the part that's going to make everything click. The reason situationships hurt so much, the reason they can feel more destabilizing than clean breakups, comes down to something called intermittent reinforcement. We touched on this concept in a previous video in the context of hot and cold behavior, but here it deserves its own full exploration because it is the engine driving almost everything painful about the situationship experience. Intermittent reinforcement is a learning principle that psychologist B.F. Skinner identified through research in the mid-20th century. The core finding was this: when rewards come unpredictably, they create far more compulsive behavior than rewards that are consistent and reliable. Skinner demonstrated this with animals in laboratory settings, but the mechanism is identical in human psychology. It's the same reason slot machines are so addictive. The payout isn't guaranteed. It might happen on the next pull. It might not happen for 20 more. But that unpredictability doesn't make you stop, it makes you pull the lever harder. Now apply that to a situationship. Some days they're all in, texting throughout the day, making plans, looking at you like you're the only person in the room. And then they go quiet for a few days. Then they come back warm and present and wonderful. Your brain doesn't register the inconsistency as a red flag. It registers the warm moments as unpredictable rewards. And every time one comes, every sweet text, every great evening together, every moment of real connection, your brain releases dopamine. The same neurotransmitter involved in every compulsive behavior humans struggle to stop. Here's the part that really matters. Research shows that dopamine is released not just when we receive a reward, but in anticipation of a possible reward. So the waiting itself, the checking your phone, the wondering whether today is going to be a warm day or a cold day, that anticipation is actually neurologically rewarding in a way that consistent, reliable affection is not. Your brain isn't broken. It's doing exactly what evolution designed it to do. But it's being hijacked by a pattern that feels like love and functions more like a slot machine. Now layer attachment theory on top of this. If you have an anxious attachment style, characterized by a deep fear of abandonment, hypervigilance around relationship signals, and an intense craving for closeness and reassurance, then a situationship with someone who is avoidantly attached is essentially the most neurologically stimulating and emotionally devastating combination possible. The avoidant person's natural inclination to create distance triggers the anxious person's greatest fear, which causes them to pursue harder, which causes the avoidant to retreat further. It's a perfect, self-sustaining loop that keeps both people locked in without either of them necessarily wanting to cause pain. And then there's the cognitive dissonance. When someone's actions and their words don't align, when they act like your partner but refuse to be your partner, your brain has to work overtime trying to reconcile the contradiction. That mental labor shows up as rumination, as replaying conversations at midnight trying to find the hidden meaning, as self-doubt that sounds like, maybe I'm too much, or maybe if I just gave them more space, or maybe I'm reading into this. The mixed signals don't just confuse you. Over time, they quietly erode your sense of reality. And that erosion of self-trust is one of the most insidious things a situationship can do to a person. Let me tell you about Sarah. Sarah is 27, lives in Chicago, works in marketing at a tech startup. She's sharp, emotionally self-aware, the kind of person her friends come to for advice about their relationships. She matched with someone on Hinge, let's call him Derek, in the spring. First date was at a wine bar in Wicker Park. 2.5 hours that felt like 40 minutes. He was funny, ambitious, asked genuine questions, walked her to her train. The next few months felt electric. He'd text her good morning some days, not every day, but enough that she started to anticipate it. They went to a concert. He took her to his favorite bookstore. They cooked dinner at his apartment and talked until 2 in the morning about everything and nothing. She started to feel like she was falling. But every time the conversation veered toward what they were, every time Sarah tried to gently bring up where things were heading, Derek would get quiet in this specific way. Not mean, not dismissive, just evasive. I'm in a weird place right now. I really like what we have. I don't want to complicate it. Can we just enjoy this? And Sarah, who was genuinely falling for him, would back off. She didn't want to be the one who pushed too hard. She didn't want to seem needy. Her friends started noticing. Sarah, he cancelled on you twice last month. Sarah, he didn't post anything on your birthday and you've been seeing each other for 5 months. Sarah, what is this actually? And she'd defend him every time, because in her mind she was holding on to the version of Derek that showed up on the good days. The one who looked at her like she mattered. She'd built a whole case in her head for why this was going to become something real. The breaking point came on a Tuesday night in October. She'd had a rough day at work, and she called him, not texted, called, because she needed to talk to someone. He didn't answer. He texted back an hour later, sorry, was with some people. Everything okay? And something about that moment, the casualness of it, the distance in it, cracked something open in her. She sat on her bathroom floor and cried for reasons she couldn't fully articulate. Not just because he hadn't answered. Because she suddenly understood that she'd been waiting for something for 6 months that was never actually coming. And the grief of that was enormous. That grief is real, and it is valid, and if you felt something like it, I want you to hold that for a second. Because what Sarah lost wasn't just Derek. She lost the future she'd been quietly building in her imagination. And that loss doesn't care that the relationship was never technically official. So how do you know if you're in one? Let me walk you through 5 signs, and I want you to be honest with yourself as we go through them. The first sign is inconsistent communication. Not just that they don't text every day, but that the pattern is unpredictable in a way that keeps you off balance. Some weeks you are in constant contact. Others you barely hear from them. And you've started timing your own behavior around their inconsistency, which is its own kind of exhaustion. The second sign is that there are no future plans and no labels. Not just that they haven't proposed marriage, but that any mention of the future, even something as casual as a concert 2 months away, gets deflected. If you've noticed that all of your plans exist only in the immediate present, that's the situationship protecting itself from commitment. The third sign is physical intimacy without emotional depth. This one's subtle because there can be moments of emotional connection, but notice whether that depth is consistent, or whether it only comes in flashes. If the physical side of things is available but the emotional vulnerability is rationed, that asymmetry is a signal worth paying attention to. The fourth sign is that they're keeping their options visibly open. You might notice they're still active on dating apps. Their social media gives no indication you exist. They're guarded about introducing you to people who matter to them. These aren't accidents. They're architecture. And the fifth sign, and this one is the most important, is your gut. Not the anxious part of your gut that catastrophizes. The deeper, quieter part that knows. The part that's been sending you a signal for weeks or months that you've been talking yourself out of. Psychological research on interoception, our ability to read our own internal states, shows that our gut feelings about relational safety are often more accurate than our rationalizations. If something feels chronically off, it's worth listening to that. So what do you actually do? The first step is having the conversation, directly, calmly, and without apologizing for needing it. Not, I don't want to make this weird, but just, I need to know where we stand, because I've developed real feelings and I deserve to know if this is going somewhere. Pay attention to how they respond. Not just what they say, but how they make you feel for asking. Someone who respects you won't punish you for needing clarity. If the conversation doesn't give you clarity, or if it's a conversation you've already had multiple times with no change, then it's time to consider no contact. Not as a manipulation tactic. Not to make them chase you. But because you cannot heal in the same environment that's been slowly hurting you. Distance creates the space your nervous system needs to stop being on high alert. While you're doing that, rebuild your relationship with yourself through self-compassion. Not toxic positivity, not pretending you're fine. Real self-compassion, which research by psychologist Kristen Neff shows involves acknowledging your pain, recognizing that suffering like this is a shared human experience, and treating yourself with the same gentleness you'd offer a close friend. This is emotional intelligence in its most practical form. And use CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, reframing techniques to challenge the stories you've been telling yourself. They didn't commit because I wasn't enough, is a thought, not a fact. The accurate reframe is, they didn't commit because they were not in a place to offer what I needed, and that is information about them, not a verdict about my worth. Finally, when you're ready to date again, you now have a much clearer picture of what you're looking for. Secure partners show up consistently. They're not perfect, but they're reliable. They don't make you feel crazy for wanting clarity. And the early signs of that security, follow through on small things, comfort with direct communication, willingness to be seen, are things you can start recognizing and choosing toward. Let me bring it all together. Situationships hurt worse than breakups because you're grieving something that was never allowed to become real. You are mourning a future built on intermittent rewards and hope, and that grief is legitimate even without a formal relationship to point to. Anxious and avoidant patterns amplify the pain, but understanding those patterns is the beginning of changing them. The mixed signals aren't just confusing, they're slowly eroding your self-trust, and reclaiming that trust is the most important thing you can do. And clarity, the kind you deserve, the kind that doesn't require you to shrink yourself or apologize for needing it, is available to you. But sometimes you have to be the one to demand it. You deserve more than breadcrumbs. You deserve more than almost. You deserve someone who is as sure about you as you are about them, and settling for a situation that can't offer that isn't patience, it's self-abandonment. Stop settling for crumbs when there is a full table out there with your name on it. If this video resonated with you today, if Sarah's story felt familiar, if any of those 5 signs landed, please give this video a like. It helps this channel reach more people who are sitting in their own confusion right now, needing to hear that what they're feeling makes sense. And I genuinely want to hear from you. Drop your situationship story in the comments below. Not because it's easy to share, but because your honesty creates community, and someone out there needs to know they're not alone. Subscribe to Psychology of Relationships if you haven't already, and turn on that notification bell, because next time, we're talking about what it actually looks and feels like to date someone with secure attachment. What changes, what heals, and why it's more available to you than you think. I'll see you in the next one.